Hey everybody, I'm Curtis.
And I'm Hannah.
And this is Love at First Fright. Have you done the connections today?
I have done the connections. I just did it.
Yeah.
Actually, before we started recording.
Oh, okay. We were both doing it.
Yeah.
Before we started. Then we just, in case you don't know, I feel like everyone plays
It's kind of a hot topic right now.
But
yeah.
I know people like when Wordle was a thing and they were like, what the fuck is that? And they did not play it. They didn't even understand it because they didn't want to go learn how to play it. And that's fine. You don't have to play it. Connections is one of those games.
Daily
games where you get like a new game that you do. And the rule's always the same. You're just trying to figure out what the solution is.
New puzzle.
Yeah. That's a word. They have a word for that.
Yeah.
But the connections, it's 4 groups of 4, and they're like 4 different categories, and they are supposed to be difficult, like based on the color that they are. So there's yellow, green, blue, and purple that you're sorting them into.
So it's kind of like an easy one all the way up to like a very challenging
what they call as tricky is for the purple one. And so there's 16 words there, and you're trying to figure out how 4 of them connect together to make these categories. We did them today, and we both did it. But just to kind of give an example of one of what a connections looks
by the time
like.
you hear this episode, this puzzle will be days
old, we're not spoiling anything.
No
unless you haven't done it and you suddenly want to go back and like
if you're gonna start. If you're gonna like get a New York Times account so you can play the archive, which live your life.
Yeah, I'm not gonna worry about it.
Yeah,
I think you'll be okay. But so you'll have words on there like dump, solid, peanuts.
Why would you pick
crazy.
Dump and solid together? First?
I didn't think
first couple words are dump and solid.
And then you'll have, dark, popcorn, sound, pigeon, or pig pen, sty, stable, prize, gift, mess, firm, caramel or caramel, and Charlie. And so those will be like 16 words there. And maybe, as I said them, some of you, if you play Connections or even if you don't, you were like, oh, I recognize how 4 of those connect.
Right.
But as an example, you would take the words dump, mess, pigpen, and sty, and those would be a category to describe a disorderly place.
Right.
Another example from this one, the tricky one, if you didn't get it, was Charlie, crazy, dark, and gift, which is whatever that word is, and then horse.
Yeah, blank horse.
Blank horse.
Yep.
They're fun, usually, although there have been days where, and you know this because I'll rant at you about it, where I get really annoyed, not because I couldn't solve it. I could solve it eventually by process of elimination, usually. But then I will rant for like 30 minutes about how like nobody even says this as a term.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the thing with all of these these daily games that have been so popular in the past couple of years, is a lot of it is just learning like how they make the puzzle. Yeah. And so it seems really hard at first, and then you kind of get into the groove of like, oh, these are like, this is the weird bullshit they always do. And so then I like figure it out, but it doesn't always feel like earned. Like there have been certain ones with Connections where I'm like, I know that this is some stuff that you guys would pull, but I wouldn't have gotten there like if I wasn't primed in that way.
Well, I think a really good example with Connections specifically is that like if you get 3 of the 4 categories, by default you have solved the 4th one, even if you don't know what the category is.
Just 4 left.
So you can lock it in. So even if you never figure out what it is, you can put it in and then it'll give you the answer.
And you still get a perfect score.
And sometimes you're just like, yeah, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. But I don't know. I like all those games. I was real into Wordle when that had its moment in the sun.
I was into it too, but I fell out of it. I don't play it anymore.
No, I don't. I every so often when I'm bored,
get the itch.
I'll bring up I'll bring up Wordle, but
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time where I had like a streak going, and
Well, that was the big thing was, what's your streak at for Wordle?
Right.
We'd send them back and forth to each other even just to keep it going. That's probably what Connections is for us now.
Yeah.
But we do other ones as well. I think some of our favorite ones, because we're big movie people.
Yeah.
There's one called Cine 2 Nerdle.
That one's the best. CINE number 2. Nerdle.
Spelled how it sounds. That one is another grid of 4x4, so another 16, and they are color coordinated again. They start out gray, but as you solve them, they turn to different colors.
Yeah.
But this one's really cool because it'll be a bunch of different things that make up movies.
Right. So it might be like actors that were in the movie or like important things from the movie,
right? Or like a director or something. It can be like really anything to do with those movies, and you're just trying to pick the 4 things that you could use to describe that movie. And so you'll get 4 movies out of that. But then the really cool thing is there's always a cross one.
Yes.
So then one thing from each of those movies that you have figured out will make up a 5th movie.
Another thing, yeah.
And then there's a reversal one, which is more of a theme.
Yeah.
That you try to figure out. It's the same basic rules where there's 4 and then there's a cross one.
I
that
love
one's really
that
fun.
one.
That one's really fun.
Anytime there's a horror movie in there, I feel like a mad genius. I'm just like, I know it right away. Yep. Here it is.
They released it, those of you who kind of like to like PvP against other people, they did a battles version of it where you're just trying to link movies.
It's too stressful for me.
It is really stressful. You have there's like powers that you can use, like skips,
and there's time limits,
and there's a time limit to enter it, but you're just trying to link movies for as long as possible, and if you can't do it, then you lose.
And
and you only can name like Nicolas Cage, you could only use him as a link like 3 times before you have to switch to something else. And so when it first came out, it was really interesting. I think it fell off a little bit, at least for me, because you kind of learn these strategies that people started employing. Like there was like a Jim Carrey movie or a comedy special where he's literally the only person credited in it. So if you are the person that can get them into the third one, and then they can't name anything to get out of it because you can't do Jim Carrey again, you kind of win by default. And there are other movies like that. There's a Willem Dafoe movie that's like that. I'm sure there's other movies where there's just one person
and that's why it's stressful to me, because I know I have a pretty good like base movie trivia knowledge, but I don't necessarily have little tricks like that, so I get caught in those because I'm like, okay, well, I've never heard of that movie.
If you want like a more single player experience of that, I would suggest another one of our favorites is Movie to Movie.
That one's really
where
fun.
It just every single day it gives you movie A, movie B, and you can go either direction you want, but you have to get from this movie to this other movie, and the goal is to try to do it in the shortest path possible
through cast members
of the movie. So you could do, I'm not gonna be able to pull 2 movies that I can reasonably link together.
I can give me a challenge, throw it out.
Oh god. I don't name for $1, name 2 movies.
Miss for $1.
My mind is blank. I can't name any movies right now. What the hell?
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Yeah, to A Quiet Place.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I got nothing.
Yeah, me neither. Anyway, the point is, so you would go from, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and you could pick anybody in that movie that you wanted to, and it's not just the actors. It's I think it's sometimes it's like people who like worked on the movie too. But anyway, it gives you like the full like credit list.
What actress plays the wife in A Quiet Place? What's her name? She's a Blunt, right?
Yeah.
Emily Blunt?
I think it's Emily Blunt.
All right. I can do this. Emily Blunt to...
It's happening live.
The Devil Wears Prada to... Oh, gosh. I don't know. to Anne Hathaway.
Yeah.
To what is something Anne Hathaway's been in?
I don't.
Someone in Harry Potter has been
Ocean's 13.
Who was in Ocean's 13?
Name a woman.
Name it for $1. All right.
James Corden.
If you
anyway,
solve it,
the point is, you can go from there. Have fun with it. Do with that what you will, and we're not going to do it here for you. Okay, grow up. Anyway, but you try to connect them in the shortest path possible. Spoiler, it's usually two, and it's usually like some obscure person you've never heard of before.
Who happens
like
to
the
be a
sound. Yeah, he's like
and
walked through the set in half a second of one scene or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's still fun. You can like arbitrarily set challenges. I know like a lot of people say you can't use Marvel movies.
Right.
Because like everyone's in there. But they're also a really good point where you're like, I just need somebody to get me into the Marvel movies. Yeah. Anyway, they're really fun. They're like we said, they're like daily games. You can literally do them every single day.
Yeah, we like to play a lot of them together.
We do like movie to movie, box office game or whatever. Where that one it picks a weekend and like 5 movies, and you have to try to list out what they are based on the cast or the tagline or whatever. They're really really fun generally, and especially like you can basically find these kinds of games for really any interest that you have.
There's like music ones, there's video game ones, there's obviously a bunch of like general ones like word ones and stuff like that.
I found a site, I don't remember it now, but it's basically an infinite thing of connections, so you can just like keep doing them.
That's cool.
Which is pretty fun.
Yep.
Anyway, but we are here primarily to discuss horror movies.
Who are we trying to convince?
Yeah, and and today we are reviewing one of our favorite might be too strong. I don't know, but we both.
I love this movie.
Okay, so we'll say one of our favorites.
Yeah.
Especially in the found footage genre of movies.
It's also a listener suggestion.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yep. We are doing As Above, So Below. And this movie is really good.
It's a good one. I feel like it got kind of low reviews from critics, but it's also like that tends to happen with horror movies, so I don't take that too seriously.
It's so weird with critics because I mean, I think even with audience reviews, like I tend to take reviews of things with a grain of salt.
Sure. And
a lot of my opinion about movies comes from let me just see it for myself,
right?
Because it's all art,
sure,
right?
It's all subjective.
It's all subjective. So like we both really like this movie, but if you're not a found footage fan, if you don't necessarily like the themes of the movie, right, you don't like the premise of it, whatever,
it's not going to be for you.
Then it's just not for you. But that doesn't make it any worse necessarily just because it's not for you. I mean, there are some objective standards you can set movies up to, I guess.
But just as some background, if it's, been a while or you haven't seen this movie, it's a 2014 film. It was directed by John Eric Dowdle and co-written by John Eric Dowdle and his brother, Drew Dowdle.
We got the Dowdles in
We
here.
got the Dowdle boys. With 2 Z's. It is a found footage horror film.
Yeah.
It's set primarily in the catacombs under Paris. And it's kind of I don't know if I would say it's a retelling, but it's kind of loosely inspired by Dante's Inferno and like the 9 Circles of Hell.
Yes.
And one description I've heard of this movie that I think is perfect is that it is National Treasure meets The Descent.
Oh, that's actually a really good description.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you have the claustrophobia of like being in these tight corridors and you're lost and, there's like crazy things down there in the dark. But this movie is like a big part of it is that the main character is trying to find the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah.
And so there is kind of this like Indiana Jones.
The beginning of it's
riddle.
Very much like that.
Yeah.
I mean, even once they're in the catacombs, there's a little bit of it because they're still solving riddles.
They're like solving puzzles and translating things from ancient dead languages, and you know, at times it can feel a little bit silly. Oh, sure. But it's also just like really fun. Those are some of the things I like about the movie, is that it's just very entertaining, and you kind of have that like, it's almost like I want an escape room that's themed like this. Yeah. And I would play it.
It could work really well, I think, as an escape room, just like theming of it.
The main character is Scarlett Marlowe, who is played by Perdita Weeks. Mm-hmm. And then we have her, like, I don't know, on and off lover /
It refers to him as her ex-lover.
Yeah. George, and he is played by Ben Feldman. And then we have the cameraman, who is Benji, played by Edwin Hodge. Mm-hmm. And then we have the kind of like catacombs guide, Papillon, who is played by Francois Civil. Mm-hmm. And there's also a couple other people. Papillon has a girlfriend named, I think her name is Susie. Yeah. And that she's played by Marion Lambert. And then they also have like a friend who comes along for the ride. His name is Zed. Yeah. And he's played by Ali Mayar, I believe is how you would say his last name. Mm-hmm. But of course, with this being a found footage movie and it largely taking place in the kind of the confines of the catacombs, it's a relatively, you know, small cast. But kind of the broad strokes of it are that Scarlett is a historian and a scholar, and she has kind of picked up her father's life's work. Her father recently died, and he spent his whole career searching for the Philosopher's Stone, which of course is this fabled, you know, item in alchemy that's thought to be able to like transmute metals into like gold and give eternal life and, you know, all this stuff. And it's, you know, fabled, rumored. Some people believe it's real. Some people think it's nothing, obviously. But anyway, her journey finding this leads her to conclude that the actual place of the Philosopher's Stone is hidden under Paris in the catacomb system that rests below Paris. And so, you know, she gets her cameraman because she's filming this whole thing. She gets George, who's, you know, helps with like language translation and stuff. And then she gets these catacomb guides to help her. And she's gonna go into the catacombs and she's gonna find this dang thing once and for all. But then, of course, stuff breaks bad.
Yep, as it always does.
As it always does.
Yeah.
I do think the whole... I love the concept of a movie that takes place in the catacombs. The catacombs are so, like, they're just, like, perfect horror subject matter.
I mean, the walls made of bones and, you know, just a like terrible, tragic history. And there's, you know, people get lost and die down there. Like, it's perfect for a setting.
There's kind of a whole, like, subculture with the catacombs in real life where just like, you know, Papillon and his crew, like, there are these people who are, like, unofficial... Because it's considered trespassing. Like, there's only certain areas of the catacombs that are open for, like, public tours. But there are people who, you know, live in the catacombs. There are people who, like, just go on these little adventures in the catacombs. It's highly dangerous because you can easily get lost. And, you know, if you there's like no light down there, no water, you know, all that stuff. Yeah. So it's really fun because it sets the stakes so high right away. Like, it's already, we're on this intense journey to find the Philosopher's freaking Stone. Yeah. But then also we have to traverse the catacombs in order to get to it. Yeah. So I think it's a really fun movie. It is kind of I mentioned before about inspired by Dante's Inferno. So it is kind of an allegory for like the afterlife and hell and stuff, and that's a big part of the horror. So there's kind of a supernatural element to this film as well, but there's also a lot of just like based in reality, like survival horror of you know, we're lost.
You know, the adventure kind of begins with Scarlett, and she's I guess in Iran. finding this thing called the Rose Key, and it's a statue, and it has like translation on it to be able to like help read some of, translate some of these things about the stone, which is kind of about where her father got before he died. And just as kind of a trigger thing for people, he killed himself. So there's, and that is important for later on in the movie, that's happened. She feels like some kind of guilt about this,
right?
But we'll get into that later. But anyway, she finds this, and then she goes and finds George, who happens to, I guess, be in Paris at the time, and he's like fixing a clock tower. And I didn't realize this, he's not commissioned to do that. He's illegally in the clock tower, just kind of
a bad boy.
But he goes around and fixes old things, and
he's
so
he
he fixes this like ancient clock tower that hasn't like rung in like 300 years or something like that. But anyway, so he can translate the Aramaic, and this is kind of the national treasure part of it. He like convinces this museum person to let them in after hours and look at this
Nicholas Flamel's tombstone, who's like considered kind of the father of alchemy. And so they're like reading it, and they're like, this doesn't make any sense. And then they figure out, oh wait, no, it's got to be on the back of it. So they take it off, and then there's nothing there, and they
then she
make some concoction,
some cleaning solution or whatever that's like a base or whatever, and then she puts it on the back of it and then lights it on fire, and it like sparks, and there's like extra stuff or whatever. And so the whole time you're like, oh, this is like
that's my favorite thing with like any kind of riddle in a movie, whether it's a horror movie or anything else. I love how, one, they're always right. But they take the biggest logical leaps. Like it'll literally be, oh, it says down, but the opposite of down is up, uppers. Methamphetamine.
Oh my god.
And then they're like, an anagram of methamphetamine is amphitheater music, and it's just like somehow, despite all the logical leaps, they are totally correct every time.
Well, there's kind of an example of this like later in the movie when they've gone into the catacombs. They have to solve another riddle to get into where the actual stone is being held, and there's this like ancient Egyptian lock that is like based on these rocks that are stacked in a certain way,
and it's trapped, so if you pull the wrong rock,
the whole thing collapses on them. And so there's this scene where George and Scarlett, because they're like the scholars of the group, nobody else really knows anything about that, the rest of them are guides, and then there's Benji, who's just kind of just a cameraman. They're like talking this out back and forth like very frantically, and being like it's based about the planets, and so that's 8 planets, and then George is like, Pluto wasn't discovered yet or whatever, and so, then they're like
7,
and then they were like, was this before or after this? And so like they just keep going back and forth on the planets thing. It is such a funny detail, because like I feel like most people, like if this was an escape room, right, they might have done the whole it's based on the planet thing. They would have stopped at however many planets we know right now. But the movie takes the extra detail to be like,
well, Nicholas Flamel would have viewed it this way, because this was our understanding.
Because things revolved around the Earth, so the moon and the sun counted as a planet, kind of a thing. So it's very fun and interesting when we have these moments. They are like the ones at the beginning, I think, are paced out so you're getting that kind of adventure sense. That scene that I just talked about does kind of just like spring up in there, and it is kind of weirdly out of place, because there was a lot of tension building up to that, and now we're solving a riddle.
Now we're just quick. Like, hold on, everybody. I need to talk about the planets. It is honestly really fun, though. I like that aspect of the movie. I think it gives, found footage is a pretty filled subgenre. And so I think it's fun to have something else that kind of, sets your film apart. And that's, it's interesting. You don't see that in every horror movie. But it's so they, find on the back of this tombstone that it's, they learn that it's under Paris in the catacombs, but it's in a secret tunnel that you wouldn't know to look for.
Well, it's like it's based around like they kind of think that it might be underneath like where Flamel was actually buried, but then they were
Right.
like, that doesn't make sense because like stuff doesn't line up,
Well,
or
I
the
guess
catacombs
in
don't
real
line
life,
up.
like where he was supposedly buried when they like tried to relocate that cemetery, his and his wife's remains weren't in there.
Yeah.
And that like is real.
Yeah.
Which kind of adds to the whole mystery.
Right,
There's
and
rumors that he did successfully like achieve immortality with the Philosopher's Stone or whatever.
And the whole thing is like as above, so below. This whole mirroring thing is very important to the plot, and like Flamel's belief of like as the world perceives it is how it should be and everything, or how it is. And so like where the stone is located underground, like it's a certain distance because he believes it to be, you know, it should be there kind of a thing. But like part of the whole crux of it is that the catacombs also don't line up with where they think it should be. But then they like realize that there were like these collapses that occurred at certain points, and like, you know, they're putting it down as like, you know, this very pinpoint that it's got to be here. Anyway, we end up getting with Papillon later as a tour guide. They convince him to take them through the...
And I just have to say, to me, the funniest line in the movie, and I don't think it was meant to be funny, but it makes me laugh every single time, is when Scarlett first approaches Papillon in this like nightclub and asks him, you know, to help with the catacombs. He says, "Do I look like a tour guide to you?" And then she says, "Do I look like a tourist?" And I'm like, "Yeah, babe, you do.
Yeah.
You're an English woman in Paris wearing a little black dress and heels and with like you look like a tourist.
You look exactly like a tourist.
You look like every other tourist here."
And you're with like two guys who one of them is carrying a camera.
Yeah.
So like you
and
look
one of
like
them
tourists.
is American.
Yeah.
And yet somehow that works on Papillon. He's immediately like, "Oh, she's right." I'm just like, what?
So they they venture to go into the catacombs.
Yeah.
They're going into an area, like we said, that is off limits.
Right.
And initially George isn't going to go in, but he a cop comes up. This is one of the jump scares that happens pretty early on. A cop like tackles Papillon, and somehow he gets out of the struggle,
trying to prevent him from entering the catacombs.
Yeah. So, but in order to like not get arrested, they all jump into the catacombs, and that's kind of where it really sets off. So they all get these head-mounted cameras, which is basically the view for the rest of the movie.
Yeah. Benji has his camera.
Yeah.
But then there's a few other people that have the head cameras.
Yeah.
But, you know, at that point, there's kind of no turning back.
Yeah.
They don't really have a choice, so they have to keep going.
Yeah.
And that's also a big part of the kind of forward momentum of this movie is that, I mean, it's not really an option when you're lost in the catacombs to stop.
Well, at a certain point, right, because you're like, well, how could they get lost if they didn't even go that far in?
Right.
You know, maybe they could just off route really quick because, you know, a cop already found them. But they go in a fairly, like, short distance.
Yeah.
And they see, like, a little tunnel, and they get into an argument because it's, like, sealed off. And Papillon's like, we don't go down there because I knew a guy, and he knew, like, all of this stuff.
Yes.
And one day he decided, I have to go see what's down there. He went down there and nobody heard from him again. Right. So like people go down there and they disappear. Nobody hears from them. So we don't go that way. We have to crawl through this area that's literally filled with loose bones.
Yes.
In order to get to this other thing. And so they do that. Benji has basically like a panic attack.
Yeah, he gets like slightly caught and then starts panicking.
Yeah, and he starts to get through it, but then the tunnel that they had to crawl through starts collapsing, so they pull him through, but the tunnel's now collapsed, so they can't go back the way they came. They look at it and they're like, we literally can't move the rock, so we have to go. But then the really weird thing that sets in is that the room that they all spilled out into is the room they just left.
Right.
But
they see the same little passage that's blocked off.
Yeah. But it's mirrored.
Yes.
It is a mirrored version of it.
Yeah.
On the way in there, they found these like cultist women who were like in this room and they were like singing, screaming, whatever. And one of them keeps like, we saw her early at the club and she looks directly at Benji in the camera, and then like as they're all walking away, he's still got the camera in and she like snaps her head and stares directly at him.
They have kind of a thing going on.
Yeah.
It's kind of a will they won't they.
But anyway, so now they're like truly in there, and so this is when
really
they decide
have no option except to go down the creepy tunnel that no one knows about.
They start doing that, and this is like one of the things that I wrote down about this movie, and that I would be like so out as soon as this happened.
Yep.
Is they're down there and a phone starts ringing.
Awful.
Not like a cell phone, but like a landline phone.
Awful.
And I was like, I'd be done. I
would just post up right there and be like, just,
I could kind of reason out that, like, you know what, Papillon never went down that tunnel. Maybe it's like a weird U and they sealed it off at both ends kind of a thing or whatever. And so this is just, it looks very similar, but it's not the same exact room or whatever. But as soon as that fucking phone goes off, I'm done. I already experienced a weird mirror thing that shouldn't be here according to the tour guide, and now a phone is going off, which he tries to say, well, they ran landlines down here.
Yeah, he's like, oh, back in the day, like, they used to run the phone, wires through this.
Yeah.
But still, like, why would a phone still be ringing down there just because there's phone wires down there? Another thing, too, was, like, once they got into that other tunnel that Papillon insists, like, he's never been down and no one goes down there.
Yeah.
He, I guess it's just kind of like part of his whole thing with being
kind
of
the
an
tag,
adventurer. He, like, tags the catacomb, so he Pap with this little symbol. And they see that pretty quickly after going into the tunnel, and this kind of creates an argument of, like, I thought you said you'd never been down here, like, what's going on? And he's
they kind of think he's, like, pulling something on them.
Yes, and he's immediately super disturbed by this, and he's like, I haven't been down here, like, I don't know how this got here, but it wasn't me. And that also kind of creates kind of some tension between the scholars, the documentary crew, and the catacomb guides. The catacomb guides are very much like, this is messed up, we should turn around, this is not right. But the crew is like, oh, but, like, according to the map, it's right there, and let's just keep going,
But they end up finding, right after the phone, the friend who went down there and nobody had heard from him.
Oh, and I should say that they do find the phone, and Scarlet picks it up, and we can kind of hear very quietly on the other end,
why didn't you pick up the phone, Scarlet?
It's awful. And she's just like, who is this? But really creepy stuff. Real creepy.
So right after they find the phone, they run into this guy who's down there, and Papillon recognizes him as Le Taupe. Or the mole, I guess is what it translates to in English. And that was the friend that went down there nobody had heard from or whatever.
They assumed he was dead because it had been like 2 or 3 years.
And so you might be thinking, why the fuck would they follow this guy? Because he's weird. And they're all kind of like, this is weird.
And he, like, is very much not acting right.
No, like, he's like standing there and he's like, you shouldn't be down here.
Just like that, actually.
But he basically ends up, he's like, are you trying to leave?
Yeah.
And they're like, yes, we want to get out. Their priority has kind of shifted
to getting out
at this point. And he's like, well, follow me. And so they follow him.
I love this voice you're choosing to put him. He did not sound like fucking Dracula's sidekick. Like, I don't know.
Come this way. But they follow him because, like, this is a part of the tunnel's path apparently hasn't been down.
Yeah,
and so they're following.
Hoping, and also they're kind of looking at it as like, well, I guess he's been living down here.
Yeah, so he
must
should know
it.
The weird thing is he doesn't have like a flashlight, a headlamp, or anything like that. So he's, to their eyes, wandering around in pitch black darkness. Yep. Like, the only way any of them can see is because they all have lamps and stuff.
Yeah.
Eventually, they find this tomb, or this, like, room or whatever that explained with the planets, and they have to solve the riddle and everything. So they successfully solve it. They go through, and then there's this room that has, like, a preserved but dead Templar knight laying on, like, a slab in there.
Yeah.
And they're like, this is weird.
Yeah.
Like, how, like, he's dead, and, like,
but he'd have to be, like, hundreds of years old.
Yeah, and so he shouldn't look this freshly dead comparatively to how old he should be. And they kind of are like, what do we do from here?
Right.
And then they, I forget what the clue is or whatever, but Scarlet figures out I have to dive down into this water.
Yeah,
so
there's
she
like
goes,
a little tunnel that goes into a second chamber.
Yeah, so she goes into there, and then George goes in, and then everyone else kind of like goes in after them. But when they get into there, this is where the actual stone is.
There's a big like caged off area filled with treasure and gold and all this stuff, and then there's like a mural thing that has the actual stone that has been fabled.
So she chips it out of there, and she has the stone now. But then there's all this other treasure and stuff in there, and then she says, "No, it's a trap!" Literally as they bust the door off, and then the whole room starts collapsing.
So they have to sort of make a move elsewhere just to try to survive.
Yeah, and so this is where like the like actual like we truly can't go back to like anywhere that like might serve as a way to get out of this place, because it's truly collapsed. These are huge boulders that have fallen. They think Lataupe has been crushed in there. Susie gets like a gash on her arm, and this is where we get to see the power of the stone. Because Scarlet cuts a little bit off and then like holds it on her arm, and it heals her arm, and they're like, whoa, this is crazy. Which is a cool way to be like, it isn't just like a nonsensical thing, but so then they think they're trapped. But then this is where the whole mirroring thing really comes into play.
They start to realize that even this new chamber that they're in is a mirror of the one they were just in. And they start to kind of reason out that they should be able to get back to the surface by doing like the opposite of what they just did to get there. Which of course was this complex thing of, you know, going down this tunnel and, you know, using the like
rappelling down like a well that's like underground and everything,
all this crazy stuff.
But it's crazy because like once they do this, they very quickly realize that they're not like going up, they're
down.
Still going deeper. At one point George points out, he's like, we have to be like 1,000 feet below the ground at this point. And it's crazy. But once they kind of cross over into this mirrored room, this
is when stuff really breaks bad.
Lataupe is in there, and then he like kills Susie like right off the bat, and then he like disappears, and I don't think we see him again for the rest of the movie.
I don't think we do.
But like everything starts to pop up. This is when people start getting eliminated, you know, through various means.
And they kind of, as they are continuing to go, there's a part where they approach this tunnel. It's kind of the only way forward, and George reads the, you know, Aramaic that's above it, and it says, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here," which is what's inscribed above the gates of hell in Dante's Inferno. And so they kind of get this idea that they may have to like go through hell in order to get back to the surface, which of course is a terrifying prospect.
It gets crazy in there. I think this is a really good spot for us to kind of talk about like our scariest moments of the movie, because I think the back half of this, like the last 30 minutes or so of this movie, is really where all of the actual like horror is in this. It's really good. Really quick, just to say, this movie's runtime is like an hour and 33 minutes. This is again like another like quick 90-minute horror thing.
It like grabs me the whole time.
Yeah, it's really good. But that last 30 minutes is really where everything kind of pops off. The scariest moment for me is probably when it has been eliminated down to Zed, George, and Scarlet, and they are trying to move through the catacombs or these like tunnels still, and they keep seeing this like robed figure who's like, you can't really tell that he's like walking. He kind of just seems to be like ethereally floating, and it's always just like across the corridor. And they eventually get to this point where it's this big empty like cavernous room, and there's one wooden like chair or like throne sitting in the room.
Ornate chair.
And this robed figure that we've seen floating around is just sitting in the chair. Like even talking about it now, I'm giving myself goosebumps. It's just a creepy scene.
I love it.
And they're like trying to be quiet and like sneak past him. or it, whatever.
Right.
And after they kind of get past it, they like look back and he started to like float up out of the chair and like facing towards them.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so
awful.
fucking terrifying, because then that leads into like these like stone demons like come out of the wall and start like attacking them, and they rip George's throat out.
It's awful.
It's so crazy.
Yep.
Ugh, it's terrifying.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the most iconic like frames in the movie is the chair with him sitting and facing away from them is just so creepy. I think one scene, and it's not a jump scare, though there are some very effective jump scares in this movie, but I just love the storytelling of it, and I feel like it really set the tone, making this like really dreadful and scary.
Yeah.
Is a little bit earlier, when it's after the phone and everything like that, but before everything has like really popped off.
Yeah.
And George rounds a corner and there's this like very messed up, dusty piano.
Oh, yeah.
And which is automatically like really disturbing to see a full piano.
Old pianos just like terrifying.
I don't know, but especially in
scary.
like a place where they're not supposed to be, it's just awful. And George kind of starts to tell this like almost fond memory of him and his younger brother as kids, and they had a piano just like this. And the only thing that they knew how to play was My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean or whatever. And he specifically says, but the A4 key was messed up.
Yeah, they could never finish the song because the A4 key was always messed up.
And he starts to play it. And then when he gets to that final note, it does the boom. Like it just, it's a dead key that doesn't work. And it literally, like the first time I watched this movie, it made my stomach drop out of my butt.
It's so good because he turns to Scarlett and he's like, "What's going on?"
Yeah,
he sounds like so terrified.
Yes, and it's honestly so tragic too, because I mean we mentioned it before, but a big part of this, especially once they get into the true like hell portion of it, is that each of them are being haunted by their own personal hell. Yeah. So for George, he feels an immense amount of guilt because when he was a child, his younger brother drowned in a creek. He got stuck and he couldn't get him out. He wasn't strong enough. And he went to go get help, but he got lost in the woods. And, it was just too late by the time he was able to get somebody to help him. Right. And that's something that just like, haunts him forever in his life. And it's just, I really love this as a metaphor for that, like, because we see, like, Scarlett's haunted by her dad. She sort of routinely is seeing, like, a noose hanging in the distance, sometimes with a person on it, sometimes not. And each of them kind of has their own little personal version of a haunting. And one that I think is really interesting is Papillon's, because we don't get a lot of explanation for his. Yeah. He does have a noticeable burn scar on his like hand that they mentioned earlier, but then they're kind of like, we don't talk about that. So it's something bad. But then when they're like deep in hell, there's a point where they see some like light coming around.
Looks like a fire burning.
Yeah, but we don't know what it is right away. But then when we turn around, there's just a car that is completely engulfed in flames, and there's a person in the car. Yeah,
and to kind of do this, there's a reveal here that happens. It's really it's kind of a mind fuck when it happens. So the reason they know to go to Papillon in the beginning is because they're on an official tour
of the
catacombs, and then Scarlett's trying to point out and be like, we need to go that way, but like we would need somebody to get us. And they turn around because a guy says something, and he's like sitting against like a column, and he's just like flipping through a book, and he says, you should go find Papillon. And they're like, oh, okay. So they go to do that. They get scooped back up with the tour, and when Benji turns back around to look where this guy was, the guy's not there anymore, and you're like, what the fuck? But the guy sitting in the car is that guy, and you're like, what the fuck? And I guess it's like Papillon wasn't able to save him from like a burning car, and like when Papillon gets killed, he's like screaming, it's not my fault, it wasn't my fault, and he's literally being pulled into the car by like some supernatural force. Everyone else is trying to like hold on to him and keep him, but he gets like sucked into the car, and then the whole car like collapses and like implodes basically,
and like goes into the the cave ground, and all we see is just his little
feet sticking up out of the ground, and they're trying to pull him out, but it's terrible. It's terrible.
It's so gut-wrenching, and it's just, they do a really good job of showing us these little, these personal hauntings, and they're so disturbing and dark. And it's I do kind of theorize, I've wondered, because the only person who we don't see like what their personal hell was is Susie.
Yeah.
And I almost wondered if hers was the mole, that she was haunted by him by leaving him behind, because he only kills her
and then disappears.
Yeah,
we don't see him anymore. I also don't think we get Zed's.
He says
what his is, but we don't get we don't
see his view of it.
Yeah, I kind of think George's is him getting his throat ripped out.
Yeah,
because Scarlet tries to heal him with the stone, but it doesn't work, and then she realizes that she has to. They missed something when they went through.
Right.
So if you remember, she took the stone out on their side, the normal side or whatever, and then they went under, but they never checked the wall there.
Yeah.
So she runs all the way back through the catacombs, and she puts the stone back in on the kind of hell side of things.
Right.
And then comes back to George, but he's kind of drowning or
in
like dying
in
his own blood, and she comes back and she heals him with a kiss because she realizes that the power is within herself.
The stone is inside me or something. I don't know.
The real Philosopher's Stone is the friends we made along the
way.
So we also don't really get into Benji's, although maybe it's kind of a lustful thing that they were playing with, because he ultimately is killed by that girl that we were talking about. She sneaks up behind him when they have to rappel down the second well to go even deeper. He like hears something and he's like, is somebody there? And then she pops up behind him, and then they're all down at the bottom of the well and they're like, where's Benji? And then he silently, I don't think he screams. No, he's silent, so he's dead up there
already,
and he just slams down into the ground where they are.
Awful.
Yeah.
Awful.
So but
it's, they have to work their way through this hell, and they all kind of have to like forgive themselves. Like that's also part of it, is like letting it go. And then there's kind of an interesting moment to the end of this, like when to them it looks like a hole going down, but they realize that it's kind of like this slab thing, and it's like a manhole cover, but they're pushing it down, but in the real world
they're trying to
push up.
They're trying to pull it towards them, I think, at first, and then they realize they have to push it down, so they start pushing and then sliding it over to the side, and then when they pull themselves out, they're like on the streets of
Paris.
And then you realize that what they were doing is they were pushing it up.
You're right.
And then pulling it's a like really weird.
Yeah, it's a very disorienting moment.
It's a really cool way. I don't really know what the implication of that is. That did they go back to normal Earth? Like it's kind of a weird ending, and I think it's up for interpretation.
So because otherwise, like, how do we have the footage and stuff?
That's fair.
But I do think it's meant to be kind of up to interpretation.
Yeah.
And you could also look at it as, even if they did return straight up to Earth, like they made it through hell, whatever, that they're like permanently changed by the experience.
Maybe that's how you obtain immortality, is you have to go through hell, and then you come back up.
Right.
Yeah. Because, I mean, part of this is realizing is the power is within herself. So, like, does that mean she can now live forever, kind of a thing?
I don't know. We need two above, two below, the sequel.
2 above, 2 below.
That's what we need.
All right. Well, let's rate this thing.
Okay. Yep. Do you have your ratings handy?
Yes, I do. So we're using our official scorecard. I made a Google sheet for it.
We're getting technical.
It's like color coded and everything.
Yeah.
It's fun. It does all the math for us, so we don't have to, mess with that. Anyway, while you pull it up, I really, really like this movie. For me, it totals out to a 7.8.
Yep.
On it. I think one thing that kind of knocks it for me is, like, while it is pretty scary, They are kind of mostly reserved for the back half of the film, so it takes a little while to get to it, which isn't necessarily a problem. I think, you know, building that tension and then having the release is a really good thing to have in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think some of them are better than others. There's the scene with the stone demons or whatever. This movie gives me a twofer of like, I'm realizing is maybe a trope or a trend in movies, and also something I will never stop thinking is funny. When Scarlet has to run back to put the stone back, she like rounds a corner into a demon and she like just pushes it or decks it in the face, and then on the way back to George and Zed, she gets him again.
Stay down on the ground.
It's so good. My mind is it's the same demon, and he's just now recovering from the first one, and she just immediately takes him out again.
It's always so funny.
It's so funny.
Anytime
and I think I'm starting to zero in on why it's funny. It doesn't hold true in every movie, but generally speaking, if it's a bad guy, and especially if they're like supernaturally powered, the idea that you can stop them by just punching it in the face is so funny. It's
hilarious.
Because it shouldn't be. So that's probably like the ding against it for me. Everything else though, like rated pretty high for me, like 8. It's all, the lowest was a 7.5. So
yeah. My overall score ended up being slightly higher than yours at an 8.1. My lowest score was a 7, but I also had some 9s in there, which I think is why it kind of balanced out in that way. But I really like this movie. I think good. If you're a found footage fan, I think it's definitely worth a watch. And if you like the vibes that we've kind of been talking about with, you know, the National Treasure, Indiana Jones-esque, you know, vibe to this, it's a really fun one. I just feel like there aren't a lot of other horror movies that give me those, you know, National Treasure vibes.
It's not crazy gore filled.
No.
Susie's death is probably the
Hers
most
is definitely the most
graphic of them when that happens. George does get his throat. It's described as getting his throat ripped out. A demon bites him on the neck, and he's spurting blood, but it's not just like
you're not
everywhere.
Seeing a bunch of
and we don't stay on it for super long. And obviously, like we said, she heals him. She comes back and heals him, and they all 3 of them escape and everything. So it's not that bad. The thing where Papillon gets sucked into the car isn't bloody at all. I mean, it's terrifying to see it happen, but it's not bloody. So it's not really like a gore-filled thing that you would need to be like, oh, I don't do well with that.
I think Susie's death would probably be the only one that would be unsettling.
Yeah, a lot of the fear of this is the confined spaces, that it's really dark, and like they're running out of like their head. Like by the time they go to leave, like the headlamps like cutting in and out and stuff, so you can't like see.
Yeah, it definitely is really good at capturing that kind of claustrophobic horror. So if that's something that works for you, I think this one would be a big win, because it definitely captures that sense of like, we're stuck in these tight corners, it's dark, we don't know where we're going, you know, it's very claustrophobic.
But suffice that to say that like all our combined scores equals out at an 8.
An 8.
And I think that's great.
Yeah. This might be one of our higher ranked movies, which is maybe a little surprising to me, but I also just like, I find this movie really entertaining. Yeah, it's got fun. The special sauce.
Yep, they did something right with it.
Yeah.
I think especially because it came out, it may be more towards the tail end of like every horror thing being like found footage or whatever. I do think like critics, I think, say that they didn't really do anything unique or special with it.
Right.
Audiences, I think, generally review this as higher or more favorably. And I think they did do stuff different. I think what you kind of locked into, that it is this National Treasure mixed with like
The Descent.
One.
If you haven't seen that movie, you gotta check it out. It's a great one.
That like, I think they really got something there. I think there's also a reason they haven't done As Above, So Below 2. Like, you know,
it's better to leave it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like, I don't think it needs a sequel. We got 3 people who went through hell, and I don't know that Scarlet would tell anybody about the stone to like go back down in there, because why would she? We get a little thing after they all escape where it cuts back to before they went down there, and Benji's kind of interviewing Scarlet, and she says that above everything, she wants the truth. Yeah, like she's not going in for treasure or to be like super wealthy off of this. She just wants the truth.
Right.
And so I think leaving it as a standalone movie really holds true to that.
Right.
And honestly, I don't know if they did a sequel, is
What
there
would you
anything
even
else to
do?
say?
Yeah.
About this? I think it's like a perfect
Just
little
like another group accidentally goes to hell.
So like
I don't know.
yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, but it's a really, really good one.
It's a
I think
great one.
you should definitely watch this. But
Thanks for the recommendation. And if you have your own recommendations, holla at your boy.
Yeah.
That's us. We're the boy.
We're the boy. Us combined makes boy.
Boy. Yeah.
No, for real. Where can they reach us at?
You can find us on social media at First Fright Pod. You can send us an email at firstfrightpod@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
We're on X. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're doing the things.
Yep.
Feel free to follow us. We like to post little memes, and we, announce when episodes get posted. And of course, you can always reach out to us with feedback or, just to give us your recommendations or suggestions.
Yeah. And speaking of recommendation suggestions, this is not one of those from a listener, but I'm suggesting and recommending you watch it. Next episode, we are going to be doing Sinister.
Oh, it's
another
so scary.
really good one.
I'm very excited.
I'm excited about that one too. I've seen that one probably like 3 times or so.
I've only seen it the once.
It's good.
It's
Sinister 2 is not as
that
good.
One's not as good, yeah. But anyway, go check it out. You got 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's worth the watch.
Do your homework.
Put your diapers on. You're gonna pee from fear.
Oh,
Maybe that's too hard of a sell. This movie genuinely freaks me out. So.
It is. There's a scene in this movie that is like it's talked about as like one of the most terrifying scenes in movie history.
Sinister is one of those movies. They've done this a couple years in a row of like they'll do these tests where they like hook people up to like heart rate monitors and stuff to determine what movie is like the scariest horror movie of all time. And this is one that's always really high up on the
consistently gets really high up.
And it's mainly jump scares, but it works, man.
It works.
So,
it works.
We'll tell you all about it next time. Thanks for listening, crew. We appreciate you.
Mm-hmm. That's going to do it for us. So, as always, scare well. See you next time.
Bye.